Technology to change your life, self-tracking in late imperial China. As it emerged, the old title didn't seem to fit. So I'm just going to dive right into this. One day, a man wakes up and finds that the ball of discontent he has been feeling for some time has grown into something larger. He has a life that might be described as adequate, and maybe a bit more. Born into a reasonably wealthy family, he has achieved a respectable career, one that almost seems fated for him. His home life is similarly satisfactory. Although he doesn't yet have children, he is in what seems to be a comfortable and happy marriage. But he wonders, could there be something more? If this man were waking up in the early 21st century, he might decide on a course of self-improvement. If he didn't have one already, he might get a smartwatch so that he could track his movement, exercise, and how often he stands through Apple's highly recognizable rings. He might use the Breathe app or Headspace to incorporate moments of mindfulness into his day, along with an app to record how much water he drinks so that he stays hydrated. A focus app will help him with productivity, as will one that tracks streaks, the number of days in a row that he completes something. He might even add a mood app to record how he feels about these changes at regular intervals throughout the day. His understanding of how to change his life is likely shaped by fitness and diet ideals, along with a societal emphasis on productivity. As scholars, we have a variety of theoretical resources to help us understand his actions. Noting how many of these apps focus on the body, we might use Michel Foucault's concept of biopolitics to analyze the power dynamics inherent in self-monitoring. Observing that this man's watch or his iPhone has become part of his self-identity, we could also turn to Andy Clark's argument about the extended mind. That special characteristic of the human mental development is that our brains adapt to the use of non-biological props. This is Andy Clark's words, non-biological props, scaffoldings, instruments, and resources. An example that Clark uses frequently in talking about the extended mind is that of an older man who has memory problems and so carries with him at all times a small notebook in which he has jotted down all the information necessary to navigate his daily life. The notebook has taken over some functions formerly carried out by his brain, and the man interfaces naturally with this material, external extension of his own mind. Clark began his work on the extended mind just as cell phones and personal devices were becoming commonplace. This thought experiment today might well involve an iPhone. Because of our human ability to adapt to the notebook and then again to the iPhone, Clark says that we should think of ourselves as natural-born cyborgs, which are, in his words, beings primed by Mother Nature to annex wave upon wave of external elements and structures as part and parcel of their own extended minds. End quote. In other words, the Apple Watch strapped to our hypothetical man's wrist is just the latest in a series of non-biological props humans have used to extend their minds and in so doing, remake their lives. What I would like to propose in this talk is that contemporary scholarship on the technological constructions of the self can help us understand similar phenomena in pre-modern times. Returning to our hypothetical man whose dissatisfaction with his life has grown intolerable, let's imagine him in the past. If this man were waking up at the end of the Ming Dynasty in the mid-16th century, he would take a different approach. Here I am drawing on the life story of Yuan Huang, whose dates are 1533 to 1606. And Yuan Huang, finding himself constrained and frustrated by what had seemed to be his destiny, paid a visit to a Chan Buddhist monk. This monk told him that he could indeed have more in life, but he would have to work for it, cultivating virtue that would be rewarded by the heavens. The monk encouraged him to make a vow before a Buddhist deity and gave him something called a ledger of merit and demerit to record his good and bad deeds each day. Yuan quickly developed the habit of tracking his actions. Writing to his sons, he explains, "As soon as I performed a good deed, I would record it with a brush. Your mother could not write, and so each time she performed a deed, she would use a goose quill to stamp a vermilion circle on the calendar." That's the end of that quote. And here I'm relying on the translation of Cynthia Brokaw. In the same way that there are now tracking apps for all kinds of lifestyles, there were also ledgers of merit and demerit for many different types of people. The ledger the Chan monk gave to Yuan Huang reflected a shared popular morality in which it is good to help orphans and buy coffins for the poor, and bad to slander someone or refuse to aid the sick. Other ledgers could take on more specific religious dimensions or be tailored for certain professions, such as merchants. Now, when we're imagining a man relying on apps in his Apple Watch to improve his life, we would quite easily characterize this as technology. Ledgers of merit and demerit, however, are a technology as well. And I would like to take a moment to explore here what we mean by technology in a pre-modern context, and indeed the importance of considering modern electronics-based technology in the context of pre-modern technologies. At root, technology is the study of the practical arts, a system of how to do things in the world. We may think of that doing as a physical intervention in the world, but technologies start with and circle back to what happens in the mind. When Yuan Huang visits the Buddhist monk, that monk tells him that his pursuit of the good and the good life has to start with the mind. Self-reflection is integral, but so is the intention behind the deeds, and that ledgers of merit and demerit or morality books often make this explicit. So Donna Haraway has termed the interaction between mental processes and material forms as thinking technologies. In an interview from 2000, she describes the use of categories as a type of thinking technology. They are not merely ideas, she writes, or says, but thinking technologies that have materiality and efficativity. These are ways of stabilizing meanings in some forms rather than others, and stabilizing meanings is a very material practice. So consider the two examples of self-tracking I've discussed. They entail different kinds of categories, and the form of tracking also serves to perpetuate those categories, both for the user in the moment and for society over time. So to take an example, if the number of steps is something that I track, I will come to pay attention to it and to see walking and movement as important constituents of my life. I may compare how many steps I take on different days, or even compare my number of steps with those of others. We will explore what these categories are for Yuan Huang and other users of ledgers and merit in a moment. The material prompts for thinking technologies are themselves technological products. If we imagine Yuan and his wife diligently marking their deeds in each day, we see that they are using pieces of paper. Yuan's wife was described as using a calendar for this purpose. Later versions of different ledgers are specially printed so that the user can assess their merit in different categories each day. Both the calendar and the ledger presuppose paper, printing, distribution, and some form of literacy. Ledgers and calendars are intended to be consumed. The act of marking them creates a record, but also means that they cannot be used in the same way a second time. In this way, they are unlike books, which can be read repeatedly, passed on, and circulated. Annotations and reader's marks might personalize them, but not in the way that ledgers become a materialization of an individual's life. When Yuan Huang received his first ledger and began using it, the late Ming Dynasty was in the midst of two important social changes that shaped the popularity of ledgers of merit and demerit. The first of these is printing and popular publishing. Woodblock printing, as opposed to manuscript, had been available for several centuries, but commercial printing expanded dramatically in the late Ming. The format of the ledgers lent themselves to easy reproduction. Carve a block of two of uncomplicated text, and pages upon pages of that same text could be printed. The late Ming Dynasty was also a period of increased economic exchange, importing vast amounts of silver from South America as part of a global network of trade. As a consequence of this trade, the status of merchants, traditionally quite low, rose considerably. The ledger format and quantified approach likely reflects the incorporation of mercantile perspectives into other areas of life. Although from our vantage point, we may clearly see that the ledgers of merit and demerit require paper and printing, we also may be primed to place importance on these technologies by their history in the West. As Catherine Bell has argued, in the late Ming and Qing authors writing about ledgers and the related genre of morality books emphasized distribution rather than printing. She writes that in Europe, this is a quote from her, people were immediately aware that the printing press was a wonderful new thing, end quote, and especially for the dissemination of religious works. But Chinese sources of this period do not have the same kind of glowing praise for printing, and stories about the production and distribution of texts comment on a variety of aspects of the process, from the calligraphy of the wood blocks to the forms of binding, to donations for the publication, not just the printing itself. Moreover, the kinds of texts printed and distributed in late imperial China tended to reinforce social norms rather than revolutionize them, as in Europe. To put this in terms I introduced earlier, the same material technologies may be employed by different thinking technologies. In the case of the ledgers of merit and demerit, these thinking technologies take shape through categories. In the case of the deeds that Yuan is tracking, his text organizes them by number of merits or demerits, a kind of price list for morality. Greater acts of kindness, such as rescuing a child from drowning, are given more points than something small like saving the life of an insect. The converse is also true. Wasting food is a minor matter compared to causing an abortion. This sort of list was used in conjunction with the simple fill-in-the-blank chart. Looking at this example, we can see that there are spaces on the right for the year and the month to allow for, and then horizontally there are 2 rows, each further divided into 2 rows to allow for the recording of both meritorious accomplishments and errors on each day of the month. On the left side, there is space for the monthly account and the carryover from the previous month, creating a quantitative monthly planner of moral gains and expenses. This simple chart can be elaborated by adding, with varying degrees of specificity, types of meritorious and demeritorious deeds. For example, and these all go right to left. Here, daily evaluation begins with the consideration of how well one has strengthened moral ties, which is further subdivided into consideration of one's treatments of one's parents, brothers, marital partner, children and grandchildren, extended family, teachers and friends, and finally servants. The next category is self-cultivation, in which one must attend to the extension of knowledge, disposition, speech, treatment of others, business dealings, preventing evil, and being respectful. The final 2 categories are less complex, with only 2 subcategories apiece. Under encouraging good, there are columns for promoting good acts and changing evil ones, while extending relief is subdivided into saving people and benefiting other living things. So this example may seem fairly comprehensive. It seemed to cover most things that we do, but compare it to this modern chart based on the Di Zigui, Standards for Pupils and Children, a Qing Dynasty text that offers guidelines for behavior. The chart actually reproduces the text, following its division into 7 chapters, and then giving each couplet a line for daily review. So to give a taste of this, here are the first 5 areas of evaluation. When my parents call me, I respond without delay. When they ask me to do something, 2, I do so without laziness. 3, when they instruct me, I listen respectfully. When they reprimand me, I must accept it. That's 4. And 5 is when it is cold out, I should make sure that they are warm, and when it is hot, I should make sure that they are cool. Someone using this chart would not only review their behavior in great detail, they would also rehearse the text daily. Indeed, the format of rhyming couplet lends itself to recitation, and it is part of a long tradition of didactic text for young people used precisely in this way. This final example makes plain what is under the surface in the other ledgers of merit and demerit. Although their format may be separate, they are reliant on a textual tradition. That textual tradition, in turn, is itself bound up in a complex of social practices. Catherine Bell, again writing about morality books, describes it thusly: these texts had to involve or evolve from forms of practice, things that people did, and these created certain kinds of attitudes. So texts are not simply expressions of changing social conditions and attitudes. They're the practices that constitute a changing and social and religious world. So what are the practices that these ledgers encode? I think we should divide them into 2 types of practices that are actually very closely related. First, relational practices, and second, ritual practices. In our second example, all but 2 of the items for daily examination entail an interaction with someone else: family members, business partners, servants, strangers in distress. This is largely true for the Deeds of Gway as well, with only the final section of the text, that devoted to study, centered on the individual. The relational aspect may be easy to see, but it may not be initially clear that this is related to ritual. To show their close connection, let's take the next couple of lines for self-examination in the Deeds of Gway ledger. And these are at the bottom. In the morning, pay your parents a visit, and in the evening, make sure they are settled. When you go out, you must tell them, and when you return, greet them face to face. Morning and evening, departures and return, one has to acknowledge one's parents, and this practice is echoed by how one should treat the tablets, naming one's ancestors in the family shrine. By the time that morality books and ledgers of merit and demerit rose to popularity, the most important ritual text was Jushi's family rituals. Jushi, whose dates are 1130 to 1200, is best known as one of the founding fathers of the Daoshui movement, often termed Neo-Confucianism in English. But equally important were his efforts to create rituals that could be practiced by most families, not restricted by rank and adaptable to different circumstances. The first chapter in his family rituals concerns the general principles of ritual behavior and how to set up an offering hall. Once established, the offering hall with its ancestor tablets becomes the ritual center of the home to be used daily. The eldest son of the family is instructed to look on the ancestors each morning, and anytime he and his wife leave home, they're supposed to also put their heads into the offering hall and perform what is called the respectful look. They do the same on returning. And if they stay away overnight, it becomes more elaborate. They burn incense and bow twice. And for longer visits, it becomes yet even more complicated. So calling on the ancestors is an extension or variation of the courtesies performed to one's parents. There are clear connections. The ledgers of merit and demerit reflect ritual practice and other texts promoting moral behavior. I want to take this a step further and argue that rituals too should be understood as a thinking technology. In my first paper for this project, I talked about Confucius, citing a passage from the Analects, in which Confucius's disciple speaks of the importance of periodic review of one's own behavior. Attending to how one's actions conform to ritual expectations is also supposed to do something over the long term. And thus, Confucius describes himself as able to align with ritual over time, so that when he reaches a venerable old age, he does not even desire to do something that goes against ritual propriety. Rituals are a system of how to do things in the world, and their embodied nature allows them to function as an extended mind. By the time he reaches the age of 70, Confucius no longer has to think about how to interact with someone. The ritual, like the notebook belonging to Andy Clark's elderly man, provides the information apparatus he needs in embodied rather than material form. The ledgers of merit and demerit are, many centuries later, an extension of this. They add another layer of technology, linking a quantified process of self-reflection to ritual technologies that shape human relationships. As the technologies of the ledgers themselves are only made possible through material technologies and their development, papermaking, printing, the distribution of books, the thinking technology of the ledgers builds on prior technological innovations. And as we see, this is the offering hall that they looked in on. And as we see here, this thinking technology can be repackaged in new material technologies. These are all apps available on your iPhone. Although time does not allow me to explore the appification of ledgers and merit and demerit, they represent, as did earlier examples, the ongoing interplay between thinking technologies and material ones. Thank you.